All right, thanks for joining us. And Kari Beckman is with us, and she's founding a center in East Texas that'll be a center of Catholic culture. And thank you, Kari, for being with us. If you would just maybe start us off by describing what the name of this place is and what your vision is for it.
Sure. Well, thank you again for having us here with you and your audience. And I hope and pray that it resonates with some of the people who are listening and watching today. So the name of our project is Veritatis Splendor. Veritatis Splendor is going to be a place where we will have education as well as retreat areas, area of pilgrimage, and supported by a neighborhood. And I think what's important to understand about Veritatis Splendor is that the first and primary goal is to communicate our beautiful Catholic faith and the truths of Jesus Christ to the outside world. So some people may think that it's the Benedict option in terms of a monastery where we're kind of closing the doors and pulling back, but rather it's the opposite of that. We're bringing people in and having a place where they can be infused with, fall in love with, and then communicate the truth of our faith to the world. In order to do this, of course, we have to have an intentional way that we are living out through worship, which is our primary purpose right now, is to build our oratory. We're dedicating it to the beautiful patron of our church, Saint Joseph. And to start with right worship, and then through the institutes, which you have probably read about, our institutes, we'll be able to communicate the Catholic faith through these various ways that directly impact our lives as Americans.
Like, what is it about this time in our history and in our culture that kind of inspired you to say, well, we need to have kind of a place that we can safeguard our faith? And yes, we'll reach out. You guys are clear about that. You're not just kind of walling yourself in a community, but you also want to show the splendor of the faith. But what is it about this time that really has called you to build a community that can protect and kind of safeguard that faith?
Well, I think there have been two very illuminating events in our culture. One is just the political tasseling that we just saw with this last election. It's the first time ever in the history of America where there would be civil unrest and the government would stand down and allow this lawlessness. Okay, it's the first time we've ever observed that. And that is really a very scary thing. If you really sit back and you look at it, that disorder, chaos, and literally, ruining people's businesses, their livelihoods was allowable. Not just, let's not, okay, we'll just kind of ignore it, but rather an actual allowance for it. We had an entire, country form itself in the Portland area. These are things that we can't just say, okay, well, you know what, it happened, we need to move on. No, we need to think about that. We need to sit back and think, how did this happen that all of a sudden citizens of this country could decide to live in this lawless way and that it would be allowed by our government? So that's one great illumination. The second illumination, sadly, comes from a lack of courage in the leadership of our church right now. We saw the pandemic hit. The church's response to that should have been and ought to always be to provide more spiritual support for the faithful, particularly if we're looking at death and dying and sickness, right? This is where we should be the hospital for the death of somebody. We should be the hospital for the sick so that we can help to either heal them physically and spiritually. Both are very important. But also if death is imminent, that we can heal them and send them to heaven. This is the mission of the church. The mission of Holy Mother Church, when you look at what all of the sacraments do, is to be able to send your soul to heaven. But what we did is the opposite. We actually stopped that process during a pretty scary time. We didn't know what the pandemic would do. Praise God, it has not done what they had originally told us it would do. But we didn't know that then. And the church's response was close the churches, stay safe physically.
So you chose, you're moving to East Texas from Georgia. East Texas has, Bishop Strickland, he's kind of participating in a way and promoting this. Is this, do you find that he's been more willing to cooperate in this kind of thing, and also with the idea of being open to the sacraments and this kind of being a hospital for people's souls during this the pandemic?
Absolutely. If you look at Bishop Strickland, what he did was what I'm talking about. He did the opposite. He brought the Eucharist literally to the streets of Tyler, Texas, where he was blessing every car that drove by, every human that came by, asking our Lord in the Blessed Sacrament to heal and to protect Tyler from this pandemic. And so you saw a man who had supernatural faith, which is incredibly beautiful. And yeah, it was certainly part of why God drew us here to do this now and here, with the blessing of a beautiful shepherd who will be a spiritual father to us in this mission. East Texas also has one of the most protected religious liberties in the country in terms of these 33 counties here. They very much acknowledge the freedom to worship and to live out your faith. And so it's a very Christian environment. It's actually not very Catholic, although with Veritatis Splendor, we're going to triple those numbers probably, but it's incredibly evangelical and beautiful and very welcoming to us. I want to say that we've been incredibly welcomed by the county commissioner, by the mayor. It's been a really beautiful experience to see the way that ecumenism should work and ought to work. So
the response, you said locally it's been good. What about just in general? You've had media stories about it because it's on 600 acres and it's this $22 million project. And has there been a response of a lot of people wanting to move there, or people who are starting to donate in ways that'll help to and with enough funding that you think will build the project, or is it too early to tell?
So yes, we've had a much bigger response to people wanting to participate in this than we ever imagined. So we did an inquiry on our website, and just for people who are interested in living here and participating in this mission and taking part in the actual daily living and the neighborhood living of our liturgical life at Veritatis Splendor, we have about 60 lots that'll be initially available for sale in phase 1. We have almost 1,000 inquiries for 60 lots.
And you said you had some, I believe on the website I saw that if those initial allotment was filled, then you would have an option for building more. Is that the case?
That's correct. So obviously, being a nonprofit organization, we have to be very careful. It is, again, under the organization of Regina Caeli Inc. And so we need to make sure that Regina Caeli is protected in its mission. And so we're being very careful how we grow Veritatis Splendor as a project of it. And the beautiful part is actually that Veritatis Splendor now can serve the church in a wide way, whereas Regina Caeli's mission is to really support homeschoolers in the Catholic tradition. So it's a beautiful way that the mission's now maturing so that it can be a little bit broader, but we still need to make sure that we take care of the mothership. So we're being very intentional and very careful about how we move forward in this project. We do have donors that have been extremely generous, and there's more of that to come. As we've had meetings, we've had them reach out to us and invite us to donor meetings, which is very unique in the nonprofit world, as many of your viewers would know.
And what's your vision for the community when people live there? What would you say life would be like? Would it be kind of like living in a small town, just everybody would happen to be more like-minded, or what's kind of the feel there, you think, after it's all completed?
Yeah, so we do not seek to be what's the word people are using? A commune, not at all. we want people to live in community. And so there will be an opportunity to belong to Veritatis community, which will have recreation and community life within it. But the neighborhood itself would be individually owned, right? So people own their own homes, but there'll be something you would see that would be unique is that, for example, on high feast days, we would do Eucharistic processions, or there might be a Marian feast day. So we'll do a procession with the Blessed Mother, or today's the Feast of St. Joseph. So we would do something, big St. Joseph table event. So those kinds of liturgical, excuse me, I'm fixing my earpiece here. Those kinds of liturgical celebrations would really be part of the domestic church if you live here, right? So it'll encompass your family. Whereas right now we have to either seek it, because not every church celebrates these things. A lot of churches, well, most churches don't even do Eucharistic processions anymore. So think of it like this: if you live in downtown, Mayberry, you're definitely going to have a 4th of July parade come through, right? I mean, we still do that in the small towns. It's beautiful. Well, here, because you're living in, a Catholic community, you're going to have Catholic processions, and you're going to have Catholic events happen. And the holy days of obligation will be celebrated here. There will be picnics planned for those. And again, education around them and the liturgical celebration, the way that the early church did.
I want to return a little bit to what we touched on very briefly about the Benedict option. I think it's interesting, in this time, you have a lot of people trying to think of ways to, to find community, to find like-minded people in a way where they can raise their kids and, protect their own faith and have some kind of future they can see that's, where their faith is going to be able to survive and thrive. And, I don't think the Benedict option, I think, is sometimes thrown around to mean a few different things, but I got the book here. I'm somebody who's a fan of it, because I think the idea, Rod Dreher, the author, talks about how, it's not walling yourself off. It's not circling the wagons. It's finding like-minded people and then, being kind of a light. So I do feel like maybe it can be misconstrued as something where you're completely walled off and you have no contact. But he worries about, he calls it like cultish things that could happen. And I think what you're trying to do is keep open enough where, people aren't so stifled that it gets kind of inward looking and weird. So I don't know if you have comment on that, because I do think, maybe you guys are talking about pretty similar things where you're sort of safeguarding the faith while also looking to make sure it can be a light to the world.
Sure. I think, when you think about this, I think a better analogy would be, because I know there's a lot of negative things out there, and there ought to be, about these cult-like communes, and and some of the negative media have said, hey, Waco's down the street or whatever, but they're not really looking. They haven't read our website. I mean, this is about formation and education. This is not about some sort of weird, mental brainwashing expedition or whatever. I would say this is better compared to, if you want to compare it to something in America, if you look at the way that New York City was first established, right? The immigrants went to New York City and they set up neighborhoods, right? The Bronx primarily were either Jewish neighborhoods or Italian neighborhoods. Well, how did they live? Of course, they lived in their culture. So it would be common to see a lot of Catholic things happening in the Italian neighborhood. It would be common to see a lot of Italian traditions happen in that neighborhood. That wasn't cult-like, right? I think when people we've kind of swung the pendulum a bit too far, in that if we identify ourselves as a Catholic who enjoys and safeguards the traditions of our faith, suddenly we've become a cult. This just isn't true. It's the first time in history, rather, that we don't recognize the beauty of particular cultures. And actually, it's interesting because the word cult, derives from culture. So there is again, and this is typical of modern history, where we've taken the word and the context and we've really put a negative spin on it, where really culture is a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing to honor Italian tradition. It's a beautiful thing to honor Polish traditions. We see this in the Catholic Church still today, but people just don't recognize it because I guess there hasn't been a big article about 600 acres for the Polish community that just built their own church, their own Catholic church. This happens all the time. The Polish have their own Catholic churches in many cities, and they're able to, and that's a beautiful thing. It's not a bad thing because they're able to safeguard and preserve the traditions of their Polish culture. It's the same thing for Catholics. At Veritatis Splendor, we'll be able to safeguard, celebrate, and hand down the beautiful liturgical traditions of our faith to our children and our grandchildren while living out our normal lives. That's the difference. While living out our normal lives, dads will go to work, moms will go to work or stay home or whatever they do, but we'll come together to really enjoy. And that's the other thing too, joyfully and willfully, not somebody else, making us, but willfully join these events as we wish. We don't have to come to everything. If I live in the neighborhood here, I'm not going to be commanded to go to the community center for the St. Joseph table. It'll be an option for me.
Do you think part of the reason the culture is wary about anytime Christians want to start a community and live together, and is sort of our obsession with individualism, where we're each kind of creating our own little world in a way, and if we are part of a culture or a family or anything, a community that has some sort of demands or interest in how we live and wants to live in common, then I think, do you think people see that as infringing on their ability to just be their own creation of their, in the individualist American way?
I totally agree. I mean, you just hit the nail on the head. We've become such an individualist culture that anything that gathers for a purpose and a mission that's unified goes under fire like this. Now, that's not to say that there haven't been terrible things that have happened when people have, built these communes and communities, because there are terrible things that have happened. But Veritatis Splendor isn't that. It's not even the same as those things. Like I said, we would want to more mimic kind of that culture when the immigrants first came here and how they would maintain their traditions from their countries. That's what we're doing. And it's beautiful in that it gives a freedom to live out your faith and not be judged by your neighbors. I think that's where we're kind of all coming from now, is there's something new going on. When in the 80s, when I was a young person, it was kind of live and let live, right? So yeah, okay, you're Catholic, you're Muslim, you're, Jewish, great. Live and let live. Just don't hurt each other. But it's awesome. In fact, I think that's a beautiful tradition you have over there in the Muslims, or, whatever. But then that pendulum started to swing, right? And then it was very much targeted at particular groups. And we would be insane, meaning not congruent in our thought as Catholics, if we did not recognize that this culture is becoming hostile towards the Catholic Church. It is. We saw this with the HHS mandate. I mean, when you're mandating Catholic religious orders to provide contraception to themselves when they live chaste and virgin lives, this is an affront to us as Catholics. And there's many other examples that I could give. We just don't have time to get into all of them. At Veritatis Splendor, we will have the freedom to live out our faith, at least in our neighborhood, for not being judged. That if I go out and I walk behind the Eucharist in procession, I'm not somehow judged as some weird, potential hater because I'm worshiping, my God in the Blessed Sacrament, but rather it's held up as a beautiful expression of my love for God.
Yeah. Do you think so? In the 1950s, Gallup was saying that 95% or so of people would identify as Christian. And the latest I saw in the religious landscape poll, I think this was from Pew Research, but they both probably get about the same numbers, was that a minority of millennials identify as Christians. And that kind of plummeting, do you think what do you think that's a sign of? And do you think as Christians make up a smaller portion of society, they'll need, in order to kind of live Christian lives, they'll need to really make more intentional acts like this to create those bonds with other like-minded people?
Absolutely true, because as we're moving forward, we are moving in as a minority, a minority that there's a cultural judgment against us before we even open our mouths to speak or our hands to do good works. And so it is important to live intentionally. It's important to have people around you that affirm truth. That's one of the things, when you talk about Rod Dreher, he also recently wrote a book called Live Not by Lies. It's an excellent book, and where he looks at where these countries have been transformed into communist countries and what that looks like and what the steps were to do that. This cancel culture that we're in right now, that's a big, giant step to becoming a potential communist threat to our country. And so we need to live intentionally where we are affirming truth to one another. And individualism is a very scary thing because it actually divides that, right? So I'm not living where people are affirming truth to me. So then if I'm not living where people are affirming truth to me, then the truth that I start to consume is what the culture tells me is true. And we all know that the culture is filled with lies.
So in that book, he talks about a parallel polis, kind of like you're saying, when it's your culture's been taken over by lies. What he, in his interviews with those people, found was they would create, I think his name was Vaclav Venda. He created sort of a parallel society of small communities. Do you think that's going to become necessary for Christians in terms of parallel school system, maybe parallel university system, maybe parallel media, maybe not using big tech so much if they're attacking, people's right to free speech? And do you think it's better to create entire parallel structures and institutions, or is it worth fighting back in all those institutions?
So I don't like the word parallel because I think that has a very negative connotation. I would say places of freedom, right? Liberty. That's what I would say, that it's important for us to create places of freedom and liberty. But I would say both and to the question. Yes, we need to create these places like Veritatis Splendor where we're living together in a community, but a neighborhood community, not a community where we're controlling each other's, this is what you can eat. This is how you have to, I don't know, learn how to do a trade or, and what trade you can learn. There needs to be liberty in an individual way. Our church definitely speaks to that. As my domestic church, my husband and I are in charge of our decisions for our domestic church. So that needs to be upheld. But what he's talking about there is coming together in friendship and fellowship to affirm truth. And one of the examples he gives is they would come together to play cards in the book. And, just that recreation, but being of like mind is a huge impact to our happiness, right? And it's important for us to have balance. We can't always be fighting. That's not a good thing. We can't always be in the fight. So it's important to have a place of rest. And I think that that's these intentional communities give us a place of rest where it's like, what? I don't have to fight my neighbor about why I have a Vatican flag in my front yard. She just recognizes that as a good. And so I think those are the kinds of things that these intentional neighborhoods will help us have, is a little bit of rest. But also when we're forming children, it's important that they see and live a freedom of truth rather than having the culture constantly pelting them. And here's the other thing that you hit the nail on the head with is individualism. Individualism has really stolen the notion of family, and it's stole our notion of being part of a hierarchical faith where we have the communion of saints and we have the church militant and the church triumphant. We are not individuals, right? Our church very much shows that we are a community of souls, whether they're here on earth or in purgatory or in heaven. You know, there's a community there, and it's important that we remember that, and we don't start to set ourselves apart, because that's where the devil really can win, right? Divide and conquer.
So if you've got a lot of good feedback, a lot of people interested in those 60 houses, you have 1,000 people. Do you have any intention of maybe looking at other spots, where a similar idea, if there's a lot of demand for people who want to live with like-minded people and they want to, maybe not a parallel polis as that book says, but, have some institutions that they can know, I'm sending my kid to school and I'm pretty sure that what will be taught I will agree with, or, just in general, that they can kind of feel like they don't have to be fighting all the time. Is that something that could expand to more than just East Texas?
Oh, definitely. I mean, our vision would be that this is just the first one. That's why we're calling it the HQ, Splendor HQ, and that other communities learn from us and that we help to establish throughout the country and maybe even the world. I mean, the thing that we have to remember is our purpose. The purpose that we are here to do is to know, love, and serve God and to be happy with him in the next. So this should not be seen as a negative thing, particularly among our own people. This is what I'm very perplexed by, especially as a convert. In fact, it's a little bit scandalous to me that when organizations like Regina Chaley or project like Veritatis Splendor seek to do something that is good, beautiful, and true, it comes under fire, even friendly fire from its own people. If our goal is to live, to know, love, and serve God and be happy with him in the next, then it would seem to me that as a Catholic people, we need to be encouraging and supporting projects like Veritatis Splendor. We want to be encouraging any type of daily living that puts our mind around that mission, because so much of our daily living right now actually is the antithesis of that mission.
What kind of pushback have you gotten? Has it been from other Catholics that are concerned about, backing away from popular culture and society, or?
Yeah, so we've had, some pushback, although I have to tell you, it's the amount of enthusiasm is 100,000 times bigger than the negativity, but it's more, judgment, right? Rash judgment of this is a commune. It's not a commune. If you read our website, you'll know that the main goal actually are our institutes. The neighborhood around it seek to support the institutes, and the institutes are there to communicate to the culture, not to build some kind of weird commune. And so it's just this notion that people, run to a rash judgment. And I have to say, I mean, I know I am on social media, but social media, I think, is not our friend in these things, right? It's a very much a gossipy and detraction kind of cesspool. As Twitter is amazing sometimes with how things will go sideways, and you find out you want to talk about the game of telephone. I think we need to rename it the game of Twitter, the way that things get all sideways.
So if you've had some pushback from Catholics, are you concerned about pushback? I know it's a very extreme example, but you mentioned Waco, but not to that level, but pushback from maybe if we do become, as Catholics and Christians, a minority, and this is seen as, not a positive thing by whoever's in power. Are you concerned about them trying to, infringe on the project at all?
So, I mean, certainly we feel a urgency based on the way that our government is headed right now, with restrictions, and not only restrictions, but then, qualifications and requirements that are taking away our civil liberties. So we feel an urgency to set up the project. But honestly, we have to have supernatural faith that God himself is either blessing a project or he's not. And he's going to make that very, very clear. He's not a God that tries to hide his intentions from us. So if we believe that this is of God, it will happen, and it will happen with much blessing and beauty and fruit. I think that's the other thing. It's funny how people want to rush to judgment. You know, you will know them by their fruits. So watch for the fruit.
Absolutely. Well, I believe you said I had a hard out maybe at around 1. So I don't know if you need to go, but that's unless you have anything else you want to add in particular.
No, I do. You are right. I have to jump on another call, but I would say that we would ask for prayerful support for people who heard today something that resonated with them. Reach out to us. We just really believe that God is going to provide us with the gifts, talents, and treasure we need to really be able to affect the culture in a good way, so that many, many families can truly live out the mission to know, love, and serve him in this life and be happy in the next.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being with us. That's Kari Beckman. She's founder of Veritatis Splendor, new community in East Texas that's being developed as we speak. So find her on her website on Veritatis Splendor. And, thanks for being with us.
Thank you for having me.